Welcome on another episode of Democracy Innovator podcast, and our guest of today is Daniel Mackisack. Um, thank you for your time, and
No worries.
and welcome.
No, thank you for
And
having me.
and Daniel, you worked at the edge between technology and democracy for the last decade. And so, if you would like to share with us your experience, what you work on.
Yeah, sure. I guess in some way, shape or form, at the intersection of democracy and technology for 10 or so years, in a range of different capacities. I originally before that I was this is going back to 2010, so 15 years. I was based in Cairo when the Arab Spring started. And that's where my that's where my interest in democracy and learning more about democracy became a kind of lifelong passion, because that whole era and set of processes that happen in multiple countries was not only like a really significant personal experience. It was a significant bit of history, and it was a significant global events. But it was also incredibly educational as to the complexities and practical realities of political change, democratic change in particular, just how hard it can be, and the sorts of underlying social processes that affect it. So that was probably like the most significant life event that led to an interest in, or a deeper interest in a kind of career change in this direction, like wanting to be involved in democracy and innovating democracy and understanding more about it. I was there for about 5 years. In that time, I was a researcher, so my research focused on we call it like the social geometry, or like the shape of social trust networks between individuals as these sorts of political processes took place. So I was actually interviewing people and mapping shifts in trust networks. And how they changed over the course of that 5-year period, which was just fascinating. There were a lot of assumptions that I went into that research with, a lot that were borne out, but a lot that were not, and that were shattered in some way as well. But it was just incredibly interesting to see, but as a student at the beginning, and then a researcher further on, the assumptions that political science and the social sciences kind of like brought into big processes like this, and see basically the academic circles kind of scratch their head about it as well, thinking that A, if it couldn't happen, and then B, not understanding the exact kind of nature of what was happening, and getting a lot of things wrong basically all the way through. In any case, that whole experience, as I said, led me to want to be more deeply involved in understanding and shaping democracy. Like, we talk about democracy innovation a lot, but I'm really interested in democratic sustainability as much as anything else, because I feel like there is a lot of things that erode democracy, and there are a lot of things that are neglected when it comes to keeping democracy afloat. Most notable of which, from my perspective, is these sorts of foundational social trust relationships between people and society. It's a problem that we are all too happy to write about and to think about when it comes to authoritarian societies. There's places where it's very obvious that people are kind of shut off from each other, and walls are built everywhere and so forth. But it's a problem that really affects every society in the world to a greater or lesser degree. And that's one of the things that I realized coming out of that as well, is that every society, regardless of whether it was authoritarian or ostensibly democratic, was essentially having the same problem to different degrees. And so coming out of that whole thing, I worked as a diplomat for a while, but I also started co-founded a startup company that developed transparency software for journalists. So that was the beginning of the work at the intersection of democracy and technology. We wanted to address this because this is 10 years ago in Trump's first election. So we wanted to address the issue of disinformation, that kind of crisis of trust. At the time, a lot of people were putting forth solutions like, we're going to use AI to just correct all the facts and correct all the data in an article and as you read it, or we're going to have a gold star or a green tick that a whole bunch of news organizations give to each other and pat each other on the back. We didn't think either of those solutions were really addressing the core problem of human trust, and so we thought a sort of radical transparency approach to the research behind journalism was a better way of going about it. So we developed software that allowed journalists and other researchers to record the work that they were doing and annotate it like this, basically just kind of talking to the camera and explaining what they were doing. So and then embedding a kind of highlight reel of things in the story once they published it, so that anybody reading an article could have a quality signal that yes, a real person did this, and B, they get to kind of follow the story behind the story and see the epistemological journey that the journalist went on. Like, this is a real person doing real work. I can relate to them, and build trust from that. So that was our approach. And as I said, that was my first touch on it was my first touch on democracy technology. I'd been involved in other projects before then. I'd also started a company earlier that was more of like a consulting slash team building workshop company where we would work with companies, small to medium-sized businesses and NGOs, and do team building workshops where we took their decisions and the sort of decisions they would make on a daily basis, and kind of gamify them a little bit and introduce other decision-making methodologies to kind of get creative to find out what people found most effective. And at the time, we were working with a number of different tools to facilitate that process as well. But it was after all of that and the sort of startup company, so sort of like getting to 2018, 2019, 2020, I came to Europe, came to Germany, and started writing about democracy technologies, started working with the Innovation in Politics Institute on projects related to democracy technologies, exploring all of the other projects that were going on, not just around Europe, but around the world, and have since undertaken a couple of my own. So now one of the big projects that I'm working on is kind of the fusion of lifelong passions, actually, because I've been a democracy nerd. It's the kind of the thing that I know, but I've also been a lifelong space nerd. And so a couple of years ago, I started asking myself, how could I combine these things together? So at the moment, I'm working with half a dozen other people from across 4 different countries on a participatory space policy platform that we've got partners in the space sector, public sector, private sector, and we are trying to create a participatory space policy platform that can be introduced at the kind of grassroots of the policy creation process to like political parties and others. So leveraging some of the technology, some of the projects that are out there at the moment. Yeah, that's sorry, it's a bit long-winded, but that's brings us up to date, I think.
I'm quite interested by this platform. If you'd like to tell us a little bit more, how should it work?
Yeah, sure. So there are a number of, I mean, as you're well aware, you've interviewed some of the people behind them, I think. There are a number of platforms out there at the moment that facilitate participatory processes, deliberative processes, digital tools for facilitating those and scaling those upwards. In particular, the use of AI has been leveraged to scale participatory and deliberative processes by quite a margin in the last few years. It used to be a matter of, you'd have to have an army of volunteers to sift through everything and make sure it was all above board. So there's all that sort of stuff going on at the moment, which I think is fantastic. I mean, I have my own cynicisms about the use of AI, but that is not one of them. I think, when the data set that you're drawing upon is and that you're synthesizing is consciously and consensually offered inputs and responses, I think that democracy technologies, obviously, there is still an issue of having humans in the loop to make sure that whatever work that AI is doing to synthesize inputs is double-checked, triple-checked, and made sure, that there's people going through and going, does this, when it shows a receipt, when it says, here's the half dozen or 50 or 100 responses that I drew this summary statement from, does that summary statement authentically line up with the responses that it's pulling from? So you still need to go through and make sure that it is actually representative and accurate. But nevertheless, it scales your ability to undertake those sorts of big participatory and deliberative projects. So we wanted to take something like that, take that capacity to collaboratively develop, sort of leverage collective creativity to develop like complex, actionable documents, like policy documents, like policy platforms, and bring it to a space, pardon the pun, that was basically outside of the kind of focus of the general public. And this is where the space nerd in me comes in and starts talking. I think the space, the area of space policy, the area of space development in general, is one that is massively overlooked, and that can be on its current trajectory, could present quite a large problem. In the future. It's a massive opportunity, and it's also a massive problem. And the reason I say that is because there's this almost self-fulfilling prophecy, a kind of a negative feedback loop that exists presently that's only gotten worse in the last couple of years, where because people feel alienated and disconnected and they feel like it's irrelevant, like, what happens in space isn't really of interest. It's kind of just for Air Force pilots, engineers, billionaires, et cetera, or it's the realm of science fiction. They disconnect, and there's a cynicism that develops where if you ask people what humanity's future in space is going to look like, well, people will usually cite you one cynical dystopia or another, right? It's either going to be dominated by giant corporate oligarchs who are drilling out moons, or it's going to be an extension of present-day geopolitical squabbles. And the thing is, buying into that narrative, however, whatever truth to it there may be, only makes it more likely to happen that way, because you sort of divest yourself from the process of determining what shape the industry takes, and what shape our involvement in space takes, and how benefits are shared, and how international treaties are developed. And once you divest yourself from a policy area like that, and I'm going to use another pun, the vacuum just gets filled by whatever vested interests there are. So all of those vested interests that are already operating in that space are all too happy for the general public to just kind of ignore it and pretend that it doesn't exist, because they get to do whatever they want, right? And place. So from my perspective, that's a big problem. And in order to prevent mistakes of the past, like environmental damage, being repeated, in order to prevent issues of the present, like massive inequality being exacerbated, the public needs to be treating it like another important policy issue. Otherwise, it'll wind up like climate change or, financial regulation or something like this, where you get a few decades down the road and all of a sudden it's a giant tidal wave that's just wrecking everything. And we don't know what to do about it, right? So going back to where we were a moment ago, we were thinking, well, how can we bring this capacity to, allow large volumes of the general public, large numbers of individuals to collaborate around something into the space sector, and also address the fact that this is kind of like a bit of a dreamy Neverland for everybody that's not really real, and it just it was a perfect fit, really, because what we realized is that the space sector has been going around, like, let's say the positive side of the space sector, like the big public agencies like NASA and things like that do all that cool stuff. They've been saying things like space is for everybody for the last 50 years. And it's not really, it's just a platitude, right? It's not really the case unless you actually make it so. And they've been trying to play the PR game, and that's all they're continuing to do. Most of these organizations are just playing the PR game. But in order to give people a some skin in the game, give them a sense of actual connection, you need to find other ways for them to be involved. So we thought, what if rather than asking sort of loaded, cynical questions, we embraced the fact that it was kind of a dreamy Neverland, and we asked them fundamentally optimistic questions, kept it really simple, lowered the barriers to entry, because a lot of the challenges that we got to this idea initially were things like, the general public, they kind of bought into the idea that the general public doesn't have anything really relevant to say about the topic. By saying things like, we're developing policy around lunar timekeeping and what to do with special interest zones and blah, 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 right? And on those technical topics, perhaps not everybody has something particularly poignant to add to that conversation, but that's not what we're addressing. The problem we're addressing is the sense of disconnect and alienation. So we don't go and alienate people by asking them all those detailed questions, because that's not what we need. We bring them into the fold by asking them first and foremost, and I know it sounds a little silly at first, what do you want the future to look like? What do you want humanity's future in space to look like? How do you want it to affect your life? What role do you want it to play, et cetera, et cetera? And the answers to those questions are, limitless in scope. People can say whatever they want. And in some of the, some of the responses we've had to this question have been, a simple sentence. Others have been a paragraph. Others have been like virtual essays. And we allow people to write their answers. We allow people to provide them in video or audio. And then the follow-up, so the answers to that question synthesized give us a kind of vision statement, right? Like this is what we want the future to look like. Then our second question, and the survey is only really 2 questions. There's a few others, but the meat of it is only really 2 questions. The second question is, let's bring it back to the present. What do you think governments and businesses and other stakeholders should be doing right now in order to make that a reality? So everybody has an idea about what they want the future to look like. And most people will have an opinion about what they think governments could be doing better. So we've structured it that way to avoid alienating people and to make sure that anybody we speak to, whether they're like a teacher in Rio de Janeiro or a taxi driver in Seoul or wherever you happen to be, can answer that question, right? And what we've found is, everybody has an opinion, right? And once you get people going, they're really excited to talk about it, because it's not something that they ever expected to be asked, because the nature of our political environment, our democratic environments these days, is that we are so focused on the problems, the many very real and very understandable problems, I should say it's understandable why we're focused on all these problems right in front of us. And it's the root of that objection that you very often hear towards focusing on or talking about the space sector, which is some variation of what about all the problems here on Earth, right? It's totally understandable. It just so happens that they're all interconnected, and we know that what happens in the rest of the world is important because of how it's connected to us, and space is exactly the same. But we're so focused on these problems in front of us that we don't ask people what they actually want the future to look like. We don't ask them what kind of thing we should be building towards. And political parties, political leaders, in fact, leaders generally, don't do a particularly good job of actually articulating a vision for the future. It's all sort of reactive problem solving. So that's what we thought is the gulf we could fill. Yeah. Sorry, again, I'll talk a bit.
No, sorry. I was thinking maybe this the alienation came from these those questions that are not asked to the people. So what do you think about this, or what do you think about this policy or the other one? Because I was thinking why people are alienated. I also have this impression.
You mean alienated from that particular topic? Or
no, I mean why people in some way, why people do not participate, why people do not think that they can change the place where they are. And also I'm thinking about civic tech softwares often to help people to participate in some policy making or discussing about something. And so I'm thinking if asking to the people to participate is also a way to remove that kind of alienation.
Yeah, I absolutely think that's true, and I think that problem of alienation, you're right. It stretches far beyond like the. It's not just. We're not just talking about the space policy, right? Or space as a topic. People are alienated from politics in general, and a lot of public engagement, a lot of citizen engagement. Certainly because there's when we talk about citizen engagement, we talk about public participation. We're not just talking about the digital platforms and things like this that we're this area that we work in at the moment. We're talking about town hall meetings and the media and like social media and protests movements and all sorts of stuff as well, right? And yeah, people can be alienated from it. And there can be a discourse around it, all of these different things, all of the problems that are identified that can be very alienating to people. And we can all kind of add to that and exacerbate it and make it worse in our daily lives by, through the sort of general antagonism of a lot of the discourse and the way we interact with each other. And I think, and this goes back to one of the things I think I learned out of the Arab Spring, was that it's a lot easier to form solidarity against something than it is to form solidarity for something new. But it is also the case that it is a lot easier to form solidarity around what we want than how we want to actually get there, right? The sort of, and that a lot of contemporary politics focuses almost exclusively on the what, like conflict around process and methodology and like the minutia of like policy. And it's not that isn't important. It's just that it needs to be complemented by a vision, by like a destination, by a by those sorts of things that bring people together, right? And I think it's the case that even in some of the more polarized political environments in the world at the moment, if you go out and ask, for example, people in the United States what they want the future to look like 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, you'll find a lot greater overlap and solidarity in the answers to those questions than you will like around, what do you want people to do tomorrow? What do you think the Democrats or the Republicans should be doing? So by not asking those questions, by not kind of baking those questions into our political process, we are really depriving ourselves of a core mechanism for building solidarity, as well as one of the things that helps contextualize and explain a lot of the smaller day-to-day policy stuff that we have to do, right? Like, it makes a lot more, it's a lot easier to explain to people why you're passing this bill, for example, if you can explain it in terms of a destination, like how it gets you towards an end goal, than it is just all by itself. So it helps to contextualize and explain things. And that's why I think it's so important. And that is why that is one of the huge benefits that I think to bring it back to democracy technology, that these technologies can provide, is they offer us the ability to almost create this like parallel kind of politics. You have the representative politics, the sort of standardized democratic processes and institutions around decision making and policy making and what we're doing today and tomorrow and so on and so forth. But we also have this ability to leverage collective intelligence and collaboratively create visions for the future about the goals we're actually working towards, and then use those to hold decision makers to account and say, like, this is your job, like this is your marching orders, this is what you're supposed to be doing, where you're supposed to be taking us, and and establish some form of accountability as to like whether or not they're actually like have made any ground or gotten us there. I mean, we see limited forms of that, although largely toothless forms of that. Like we've had the Paris Accords, for example, around climate, where got these like actual goals are set, but because there's no formal process of accountability and around there at the domestic political level, individual countries within their own politics can kind of just push them to side and not really focus on them. There is other countries like the UK that have established independent councils that set goals and set targets for the government to making it legally binding to meet certain targets around climate. That's kind of closer to the thing that I'm pushing for, is that by having a collaborative public process, basically collaborative goal setting, you can, and if you can establish this is the sort of general direction, or this is the kind of future that people want you to build, then you can actually start holding governments accountable to whether or not they get there or not.
Yeah, I was thinking about how people, if you ask something about if you ask a specific question, as you said, like what you'd like to see, it's easier for people to say something, while often where people fight is how you would like to do it. That was the second question of the poll, and I was thinking that also, like a lot of times people are divided because they think that, I don't know, I'm leftist or I'm from the right party, whatever. While if you ask the question, often there are people from different parties, different political positions, that often they think the same about a specific topic. So if you really analyze the problem, I mean, okay, yeah, it's banal, but it's better than just being partisans. I mean, I don't know if.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, go please.
I was just saying. I think it's kind of the other side of the coin, right? Like it's the other side of it's this vital part of political progress that we've kind of sidelined for a long time. And again, understandably, because there's so much going on and there's so many problems. What do you want to call it? The polycrisis or what have you. But it's also one of the things that can kind of help to pull us out of that. And I've always been a big fan of this like idea of, for lack of a better way of putting it, like working backwards towards the future, like establishing a goal, and then asking yourself, okay, what would that require? You take a step backwards, and then what would that require? And you take a step backwards, and then what would that require? And you take a step backwards, and you keep doing that until you arrive at the present. And then you sort of have your roadmap and you have your priorities, right? So I think so much of politics is starting from the present and just kind of asking ourselves, what can we do? And kind of abandoning the creative process from the outset. And I think it was, I think we've had him on, but Stephen Boucher, who was saying to me like last year sometimes, like, creative, what did he say? Constraint is the mother of creativity. And so if you start out with what you can do, then you're not really engaging in the creative process to begin with. You start out with what you must do, then you actually get the gears turning, and you actually start, okay, well, if that's what we have to do, then like how do we get there, right? And you're forced into a creative process where you have to start doing interesting things. So yeah, again, like I said, I think it's this missing component of our political process. I think that that the technology now, these technologies that you've interviewed a bunch of the people who are building them, who are using them, and are growing them and promoting them. One of the things that they can do is give us the capacity to scale up this sorts of this collective creativity, this mass collaboration. And the other benefit that it offers, of course, as I said before, is that it provides context and sort of explanation for all of the other stuff that we have to do right now,
I'm thinking about the experiments that can be done at the moment with these tools. And I'm thinking about what you said before about the binding, that when people discuss, citizens discuss about something, then institution should take that, I don't know, report or whatever, and like try to apply, or at least to consider what came out, the output of the participatory process. But often they don't really have to. I mean, if they want, they can do it. Otherwise, they can also decide to not do it.
It is a bit of a problem, and we've kind of taken a bit of a different route with this problem. So, and I guess this goes back, this is kind of unique to the space sector, right? I don't think this applies in every area, but this is also one of the reasons why we've designed our particular project like this. There are already perhaps a dozen civil society organizations in the sort of burgeoning space civil society sector internationally that conduct top level advocacy, like government level, state level, intergovernmental level advocacy, whether it's lobbying governments and agencies directly, or going to the sort of the NUSA events in Vienna and sort of promoting these sorts of ideas. And it is incredibly difficult to navigate because by the time policy gets to that area, that level, I should say, there are all sorts of different, fingers in the pie, right? And there's all sorts of different vested interests at play. It's an incredibly difficult space to navigate, and it changes dramatically from state to state, from context to context. So because our project is a grassroots kind of project, right, where we're trying to get citizens to collaborate to produce a citizens policy document, we thought, well, what would be the best place to take this? And again, it's not entirely unique to the space sector, but space sector is one area where this space policy is one area where it is particularly prominent. And what I mean by that is, with a lot of the beginning of the policy creation process, in not just in full democracies, but to a certain extent, partial flawed democracies as well, any multi-party system, begins at this like party level, right? And there are, I guess you call them like tentpole policy areas, and there are big ones that are pretty common across the world, and then there are some that vary depending on which country or political context you're in. But pretty much across the board, everywhere you go, space is not a tentpole policy area, right? It's not climate, it's not housing, it's not like, education and healthcare, it's not immigration, it's not one of those things where everybody wants to have a say, everybody wants to be part of like deciding what the platform is going to be. For a lot of, as I said, pretty much for all political parties in the world, space policy is, and I might be generalizing a little too much, I might be being unfair to some political parties, but generally speaking, it's a few people who have an interest, who have some expertise, and they draft a policy proposal, and it gets voted on by a committee, and that becomes the baseline policy platform in that area, right? In space, in this case. And so at the same time, political parties, again, almost across the board, are looking for policy validation. They're looking to attract attention to what they're doing. They're looking to sort of they develop and have thoughtful policy on these in these emergent domains. I mean, space is one, AI, of course, is another, but there's a lot more attention, I think, on AI at the moment because of how it cuts so obviously across the board and affects everybody's lives in ways that are not yet obvious. In ways that are a lot more obvious than they are, for example, in the space sector. In the space sector, it's kind of the point of like germination for policy is in a lot of cases a few interested parties, right? A few interested people, or collections of individuals who just happen to care a lot about this topic. So we want to introduce, rather than, like you were right before, in that like most participation, effective and honest participation processes or projects depend on state level or high level political investment and will in order to validate the entire thing, right? So you need somebody at the other end to say, look, we are really seriously going to listen to you, and we're going to take what you say seriously, and we're going to integrate it, or we're going to do this, that, or the other thing with it. I don't think it's universally the case that in every participation project there has to be not every participation project has to manifest itself as government policy at the other end. I mean, that just doesn't happen. It is true, however, that every participation project, every effective participation project, has to be honest about what the possibilities are. So I think, if you go to a bunch of people, either in a city or a country or a town or globally, whatever, and you say, look, we're doing this project, we want to hear what you have to say, and it's going to become, great things are going to happen, it's going to be, all the politicians are going to listen, and it's going to be amazing, and that's not actually what happens, then people are going to go away pretty pissed off, right? But if you go to people and you say, look, we want to hear what you have to say, and we might take it seriously, we might not, but it's just going to be really interesting and it's going to inform our thinking, right? People will still want to give their opinion. So it's just really important to be honest about what's more important, I think, than political will is honesty and transparency on the part of the people who are actually conducting the project, I would say. In our case, we're being honest and transparent about the project and where it's going. And we're not promising anything to anybody because we're kind of embracing the fact that people already assume that nothing's going to happen on this topic anyway because they're alienated from it. And like, what could they possibly say that would be of relevance? They go into it with this sort of attitude of like, well, space is all just fluff anyway, and this is just a fun exercise to paint a picture of the future. So our logic is, well, if we can embrace the fact that it's kind of, like I said before, this dreamy neverland, and then we can go away and we can move the ball or move the dial, whatever metaphor you want to use, even a little bit, then it creates, in the place of this negative feedback loop that existed before, where people are being driven further and further away from caring about this policy area, all of a sudden they're like, oh, wow, okay, somebody listened, that people actually are thinking about what I said. So our strategy is to take this collaborative policy document, this citizens policy document, and introduce it to those organizations at the grassroots level of policy formation, and ask them to treat it as a foundational document, to treat it as a reference. Say, okay, well, if you need a space policy, if you're writing a space policy, even if you already have a space policy, here's what people are saying. Here's what people are saying internationally. Here's what people are saying in your geography, in your whatever political catchment you have is relevant. And we would like you to reference this document. We would like you to look it over and incorporate some of the ideas that are in this document into your policy platform. We want to say that to political parties, civil society organizations, and any organization that is increasingly in need of a policy on this emergent domain. And what we want to come out of that is two things. One, that it will trickle up rather than trickle down. So as I said, all the advocacy is just happening at the top level, right? So if we introduce these ideas at the bottom level, perhaps they meet in the middle. It's not. We can do it. We can introduce it to multiple political parties within a given party system. We don't have to be picky and choosy about who we are introducing it to. Everybody can see it. Everybody can access it. Everybody can reference it. And it also, hopefully, this is the idea, is that it helps to generate not just effective citizen-derived policy that promotes public benefit over the long term and addresses some of those problems that I mentioned earlier, but that it also, in so doing, because it's an international project, helps generate policy alignment, which is one of the big issues when it comes to topics like this. When it comes to things like climate and financial policy and other things, it's not just enough to have, as we've seen, it's not just enough to have one country that has a pretty decent climate policy or a financial regulation policy, because businesses and everybody else will just go, okay, well, we'll go to somewhere else. We'll go to New Zealand, for example, or somewhere that doesn't have as effective policy, and we'll find a loophole. So, that's the logic. We're not going for that. We are not treating top level political will as a prerequisite. We're going in at the bottom.
Okay, and you shared something about your background as related to democracy and technology, and if you'd like to share something about your academic background. I saw that you started in the IT, then you moved. How it happened, and also something related to your personal background, like where did you live? Where do you live now?
I started in IT while I was at university. I was going to be an IT guy. And then I worked in international development for a while with refugees. And wanted to learn languages, and kind of was thinking about international development and diplomacy for a while. And but then, yeah, I found myself just fascinated with democratic systems and practices and the kind of like social foundations of democracy and how it all worked. And in reality, the revolution, as I mentioned, is a big part of that. And so, yeah, just kind of that, I guess that's the thread that was winding its way through the last 10, 15 years. In the course of the last 20 years, 10, well, I don't know how many years it is now, but I mean, I've lived all over the place. I was in the Middle East for ages. Been in India, Ethiopia, Turkey. I was in the US for a while, Australia for a bit. I'm in Germany now. I was in Malta for a while. I've been in Germany for the last couple of years, few years. Yeah, I think I just wanted to work on projects and help build things that I mean, if I'm honest, I was always a Star Trek nerd, so I was always working backwards from that Star Trek future, you know, and asking myself like, well, that's the future I want. What is, taking one step back, what does that require? And then what does that require? And then what does that require? So that's my real motivation is just trying to identify the things that I think make good first or second steps towards that. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it was something about you, just to share something about.
Yeah, well, I'm a huge Star Trek nerd, so that's a.
Okay. And are you like in your research now, in your project, do you have any problems that you're struggling with right now? Also, maybe someone will listen. I don't know, maybe also some collaboration that you'd like to do with someone.
I mean, sure. Yeah, there's always problems. So it's very difficult to translate when you're working across sectors as diverse as this, like democracy innovation space and the space sector. It's completely different languages, right? Like, and it's two completely different bubbles. So it's we're trying to bust the space bubble with real world like citizen input, and like they all say that they want it. Like you go to the big conferences and they'll say, oh, you know, we need to bring the public on board. We need to get people caring about space. We need to have all this input. But it's just a giant, they won't mind me saying this because they know it's true. It is just a giant bubble where everybody talks to each other and there is really no significant public outreach beyond, you know, journalism and stories about cool telescopes and rocket launches and, you know, things like that. I mean, I'm generalizing perhaps a bit much there, but it is a terrible bubble and it needs bursting. And it needs bursting with authentic public opinion at scale, saying this is what we want. This is how you're going to get public support, because of course they're all paranoid about losing public support, the little public support that they have at the moment. So they all want that, they need it. And then on the other side, you've got the sort of democracy, innovation, you know, more generally the sort of democracy, advocacy, activism sort of space. And a lot of people in that space will just be like, sorry, I keep using the word space in multiple contexts. A lot of people in this area, right, will just think space, like, what the, you know, who cares, you know? So that they're also part of that this negative feedback loop. And we've obviously picked it. We're doing this for like as reasons that I think I explained before, but there's a real huge problem of like trying to get these two areas to talk to each other and care about or see the potential in this connection. So that's a big a big problem, is like translating between those very, very different worlds. And it makes bridge building quite difficult. So I guess if I was to say anything to anybody who might be listening, is if you are a democracy nerd that is also a space nerd, or a space nerd that's also a democracy nerd and governance nerd, then please get in touch, because we could use your assistance bridging that divide. And there's a real opportunity here, because it is an opportunity to do something really significant and practice collaborative policymaking at scale, and have it get listened to, not just hopefully within political parties and grassroots, at the grassroots of the policy formation process, but also I know that there is a huge interest in hearing what people have to say at big industry conferences like IAC and the UN World Space Forum, and like places like this as well. So there's a real opportunity. So yeah, please reach out. The other problems are, logistical, organizational, financial. The usual.
Yeah, usual problem. Like, and I was thinking, in the latest 15 years, if you have seen, I suppose yes, maybe also AI, any change. When you started getting interested in civic tech, in technology and politics, compared to now, of course there are a lot of differences, but if there is something that really is particular, and also because you travel between many countries, if you have seen any particular difference related to the places and not spaces.
So I guess, so the first part of that question was around technology, the difference in the possibilities, you mean, or is that
I was thinking, so this idea about technology that could help people for their socio-economic, political life is not very new. It's been some time that there is this idea. Now we have new technologies like generative AI and so on. I was thinking maybe in the I don't know how people, let's call them civic hackers, how they're approaching. I don't know if you have seen any difference. Yeah.
I think okay. So my first encounter with what I would call demtech, is, I've always thought about it as people talk about govtech and civic tech, and then obviously we wrote for democracy technologies. I view govtech as about improving, it's about government processes, and civic tech, the beneficiary is the citizen itself, right? Helping out the citizen do things, and inform the citizen and things like that. This is really difficult, but everybody has a different opinion on what the circles in this Venn diagram are called. But democracy tech is something where in my view, where the institution, the practice of democracy itself is the beneficiary, right? That it becomes more democratic as a result. And my first encounter with democracy tech, something that we considered democracy tech, was probably, I want to say 15 years ago. And it was a piece of open source software called Better Means that I think is defunct now. And I was a huge fan of, I still am a huge fan of liquid democracy as this some people will laugh, but I'm still a fanboy of liquid democracy as this kind of cool halfway point between representative and direct democracy, where tokens shift around, influence shifts around. It's not hyper responsive, so you can still have policy consistency, but it's not hyper stagnant. I love it. Anyway, Better Means was this sort of allowed you to, it was kind of like a combination of Trello and these sort of like project management tools that we have now, with democratic elements introduced, and collaborative, like decision making around like work assignments and how much somebody should get paid for something, and how much this would be worth, and what priority this should be, and all of this kind of stuff, right? It wasn't entirely liquid democratic, but there was all sorts of different democratic components baked into it. I love that, right? I loved it, and I wanted it. I wanted to like build something like that, and to actually like build a platform at the time. This was like, I was a lot younger. I wanted to build a platform at the time that that allowed people to sort of connect nodes, connect like issues that they encountered, ideas that they had, people that they knew, and draw these nodes together into like a new node, which would create a collaborative workspace, right? So kind of like a cooperative formation tool, right? And that was my first encounter, my first like dream in terms of like, oh, this is the thing I'd really love to build if I had the tools and the time and the resources. What came out of that was Democracy Works, which was the like consulting team building workshop thing that I mentioned before, and I never wound up building the actual tool itself. But the difference back then is that all that sort of stuff was just pie in the sky, right? Like it was dreamy. It was like, wouldn't this be amazing and cool? The reality of it actually catching on, becoming marketable, and people using it at scale was not very likely, right? Because it hadn't become like the idea of civic tech, gov tech, and democracy tech had not become as established and as certainly as it is now. Over the last like 5 to 10 years, it's just been making leaps and bounds. Like now there's governments, city governments, national governments all over the world doing really cool, innovative stuff, building their own tools. There's companies that build tools. There's nonprofit organizations that build tools. There's closed source, open source. It's just like, there's all sorts of stuff, and it's getting traction, and it's a growing industry. And so all of those ideas now are coming out, and they're real, right? And you can actually do things differently. I think that's amazing, right? That's awesome. And I know this is going to sound a little silly, so I apologize. But that's also one of the things that attracts me to space as a I don't know what word to use, but like as a paradigm of human development, as well, is because a lot of people out there will look at space as be like, oh, we can go and mine asteroids and make a lot of money, or like, oh, we can settle Mars and do whatever, or we, there's obviously also the science and technology element to it as well. I look at space and I think this is our first real opportunity, perhaps ever, disconnected from the moral and ethical, the terrible moral and ethical implications of like colonialism and like and all the different phases of historical human settlement and colonialism throughout history, where we've had the opportunity to actually try out new systems of government, new ways of working together, new iterations on this idea of democracy in a vacuum. Again, pardon the pun. Like this is like, we get to do things new. We get to try authentically new things here because we're going somewhere where there's not already an established way of doing things. It is kind of the Wild West, right? And so to pass up that opportunity would just be a huge tragedy, right? Like to just say, okay, well, we're just going to let the big companies and like China, Russia, and the United States like just bash it out and like do whatever they want because space is irrelevant to our lives and we don't care anyway. That, I mean, again, I understand why people have that perspective, but I also see it as a huge tragedy because there is also the opportunity, like this environment is so dangerous and so crazy difficult to do anything in. It necessitates cooperation in a way that is just unprecedented. And with that comes the opportunity to actually create new governance structures and new ways of working together and new ways of making decisions together and things like that. So I see that as like a huge opportunity. And I just really, really hope that we seize it. So I think that is also the point of connection between that democracy innovation space and the space sector that I mentioned before, that I hope people can recognize. Yeah. Does that answer your question? I think there was a part two of your question.
No, it was a very good question. So I'm thinking that, this way to say, if you don't care about politics, politics will care about you. Maybe it's the same with the space. If you don't care about space, space in some way will care about you. I mean, you will not participate in the policy related to space. And if you have any message for the people that are working on similar tools, that are researching on
similar tools. I think all the tools that are being developed are fantastic, and there's going to be nuances about each situation and each context that make one tool slightly more useful than another one. So it's good to have a market of tools that are available to people, and I think that market is growing, and that's wonderful. And as far as people who might be working on similar projects, I think we'll power together. So if you also happen to be trying to bridge this particular gap, please get in touch, and we'll see how we can work together. That's it.
So thank you a lot, Daniel. If you have anything else to add that you'd like.
No, thank you very much for having me on. I apologize for talking your ear off so much, but really, really grateful for the invite. Thank you.
You're welcome, and thank you again.
All right. See ya.